Hello, everyone. Welcome to this hopefully fairly quick video going over some important research skills for your essay writing assignment. This covers essay writing basics for research skills. So this is the kind of things you'll be looking at for a first, second year class as you move further along in your program. Some of these rules and guidelines will shift, but hopefully this gives you a good starting point. So I am going to share my screen here. Okay, hopefully we are seeing my slides now. So research skills with me, your TA, Bronte. We're going to cover where to search, what counts as academic, and I'm going to give you a short little example walkthrough as well. I'm going to be trying to move through this content fairly quickly, but if you have any questions, remember you can always email me. So starting with where to search, the important thing is not on Google or ChatGPT, for many of the same reasons. So the number one thing is that Google or any other search platform that is kind of designed for general internet use is not going to be filtering for search quality. They're going to be using kind of SEO and advertising rankings, and very much not the kind of organization you need for research. It's going to miss important academic sources, giving you a lot of general websites. You're going to find a lot of social media, a lot of blogs, generally things that you're not able to use in academic research papers. And as a result of those first 2 points, if you are using Google as your primary kind of search engine for research, it is going to take you far longer to find what you need. You might be able to eventually find the academic sources you need, but they're going to be like 6 pages in on Google, and it's going to take you way longer to find those sources than if you just jump to the next spots. So the number one place you should be researching is on the university library website. This is a great service because it brings together all of the databases that you have access to as a student. One of the things your student fees pay for is access to a large range of academic databases. This means that academic sources are going to be prioritized, and also these websites are designed for doing academic research, which means they have advanced search functionality and are just going to really help you refine what you're looking for far easier. The last point of where you might be searching is perhaps applicable in a more narrow set of circumstances, but I want to mention it anyway, and that is going to individual databases. And this is much more case specific. So a good example is if you're trying to find a very particular approach to a very general topic. So for example, maybe you're writing a paper about the discovery of evolution as a scientific theory, but rather than just talking about like the biological proof, you really want to be writing about what is the impact that this has on the humanities. If you're just searching in the library database, you're going to be getting a lot of science results because the database doesn't know you're taking a humanities approach. So if you go to a website or to a database that is specifically about the arts and humanities, it's going to help narrow the pool of sources to find it much more easy, to make it much easier to find that very particular approach. So for example, JSTOR might help you find that kind of arts and humanities approach to a concept like evolution. So that circumstance may lead you to use an individual database, but that's a much more narrow case than just kind of starting with the university library website. Which brings me on to what to search. And this is the most important area for this project. So the big thing is the fact that designing your search terms will determine whether or not you find your sources. These sources do exist, I promise. Even if your initial searches, you're not finding anything, it just means that you need to refine. Especially at the first and second year level, you may be running into this situation where you're not finding sources and it may feel like there's nothing out there, but there is. And unfortunately, you cannot skip research or use poor quality sources and then just tell me there's nothing on my topic. This is something I hear quite a bit from undergraduate students. And oftentimes it is really just a problem with how you are thinking about research. And it's really important that you drill down on these skills to make sure you're meeting assignment requirements. So you need to, in this process, balance being too general with too specific. So if you search something like Mona Lisa, you're going to get oodles of sources, most of which are not going to be the kind of sources you need. But if you search Mona Lisa in 1990s video games, there's probably not very much on that. You're going to have far too few sources. So you need to think about where is that balance in the middle. One of the ways you might do this, and then this also applies if you are perhaps, as I have asked you to do for this assignment, researching something that's very niche, where no, there's probably not an academic article about the specific fan fiction you're writing about, or the specific kind of piece that you're looking at, if it's very contemporary or by a smaller artist. So you might want to think about themes in this case. So to my previous example, the topic of Mona Lisa in 1990s video games, maybe I'm looking at the way that classical paintings show up as Easter eggs in video games. I could just search classical art in video games, and maybe the author of that paper is going to use a Caravaggio piece as the core example, but the general idea about classical art being used as inspiration in video games is going to be the same across both of those ideas. So that's a more thematic approach to your research. This is also a situation where, especially as you move further along in your academic career, you might be using a theoretical approach. So again, with this example, maybe I'm going to use some feminist theory about the male gaze and how that might impact what I'm talking about. This will become more applicable the further on you go in your studies. And the last thing when you're thinking about what to search is to experiment. You need to adjust your search term and your approaches and kind of push through that initial frustration when things aren't showing up. So you've done your searching. Now we get to the question of what counts as academic. And this is really important, both for just the general quality of your research and also because your TAs, like me, are going to be assessing you on the quality of your academic sources. This is where I get to see into your research process and make sure that you are kind of meeting academic standards. So probably the biggest place you're going to find things is in peer-reviewed articles. These are academic journals like you will find in library databases, not popular magazines. So peer review articles will say that in their listing. They'll be identified as peer-reviewed, and those are the kind of journals that you're looking for. You will also be able to find chapters and books. So you're looking for published academic books. Many of these will have undergone peer review as well, although that won't always be clear. So a good check whether the book you have found is a good academic source is by looking at who published it. So if it's published by a university press, so University of Toronto, Oxford University Press, MIT Press, these are some common ones that are going to come up. If they're being published by a university press, this is usually very high quality academic research. So that's a good flag that you found a good source. Because again, we're not just kind of looking for general popular books that are directed at a general audience. We still need our books to be academic sources. And because this is a visual arts class, I also want to talk very briefly about exhibition materials, which can sometimes be considered academic materials. So this is things like artist talks or interviews, catalog essays, exhibition reviews, but not item descriptions on websites. So like if you go to the AGO's website, you can look up a painting and they're going to have a description of the piece there. That description is not an academic source, but if that piece had been on display in an exhibition and there's a catalog essay discussing that exhibition, that would be considered an academic source. A lot of this is kind of gut feeling, and if in doubt, always ask your professor or TA. But in general, larger institution equals more academic weight. So a material from an AGO show at the Art Gallery of Ontario is probably a really good source, but the local art gallery in my hometown is not. So these standards for what counts as an academic source are definitely open to critique. And the further on you go in academia, you will be able to engage in that critique. But these are guidelines for at this first and second year level where unfortunately, you have to stay within these much more narrow parameters, which leads to the last note, and another common mistake that comes up is that dissertations or theses are not academic sources. These are still student works. They're not professional academic research. So even though they're going to show up in the library search database, they're not things you should be citing in your own research because, again, these are students, and they are writing for a different goal. It doesn't have the same level of peer review as the other things we've talked about. They are not academic sources. However, if you find a dissertation that looks like it applies to your topic, search the author's name. As a PhD student, I can assure you that my advisor are constantly telling me that I should be publishing my research as well as working on my dissertation. So it's quite common that if you're finding a PhD dissertation in a library database, the author of that dissertation will have published articles or maybe even a book with that same research. So you can check that if you're trying to get access to kind of those ideas. So those are the general things, and I'm going to now walk you through a little bit of an example, which kind of runs parallel to the assignment I've asked you to do, but hopefully it's not going to step on any toes with the ideas that you're already working on. So in this imagined scenario, I am writing about this sign, which hopefully you can see on my slides. And this is an item that I have in my personal collection. It's by a local artist. I purchased it at Museum London in the gift shop. And when I bought it, I bought a copy for myself, but also several spares to give as gifts to other trans people in my life. And when I'm looking at this object and I'm thinking about this paper I want to write, my idea is to write about why signs like this one are important ways of community formation and political organization for trans folks. So this is my starting point. This is the context. And like the situation you will be in with your research that I've asked you to do, there's not going to be an article, a peer-reviewed academic article already existing about this cute little gender not applicable sign that I picked up in London, Ontario. I'm going to have to think about how do I do academic research without being able to get a source that's specifically talking about the particular sign that I have. So part of how I might approach this was by creating a list of research questions. I will not necessarily answer all of these questions in my final essay, but they're starting points for me to think about what is of interest, and it's going to guide my search terms. So some research questions I came up with are, what is the history of signs in the LGBT community? How do signs circulate? What is the relationship between signs and political activism? And how do trans people find community? You'll notice these are very open-ended questions. They're not simple yes, no. There's a lot of possible wiggle room and a lot of room where I can be informed by my sources. So from those, I have pulled together a potential list of starting points for search terms. So what is I would type in something like history of LGBT sign making, signs in political speech or signs in community organizing, transgender community formation, gift giving in trans communities, transgender social isolation, and small run signs. These are some things that I think might be useful to me when I'm going over to the library database. And from this list, I'm able to then think about, before I start the research process, what are some of the potential issues I'm going to run into? And some of the things that I came up with based on this imagined project is, and this is a big one you may run into in your own research for this assignment, is, am I going to use sources that address the whole LGBT community, or just trans perspective in particular, or just bisexual experience in particular, if that may be the case, or just queer? Like, there are obviously a wide umbrella of experiences that fall under the LGBT umbrella. And I need to think about, as the researcher, as the person who's going to write the essay, am I going to look generally at sources about the whole LGBT community, or am I just looking for sources about the particular experience I'm talking about? Another question that may become an issue is, do I think signs and e-signs are equivalent? Am I going to use articles that are addressing the digital experience, or do I only want to talk about sources that are specifically considering physical objects like the one I have? And then finally, am I going to use qualitative, so descriptive sources, or quantitative numbers-based sources? There are no wrong answers with these questions. I could answer yes or no to any of these questions, and that would be a-okay for an assignment. The big thing is that you have to be intentional about these choices, and sometimes you're going to want to tell your reader in your essay. So for example, if I decided that Zines and e-Zines are equivalent, I might say that in my essay. I might say something like, this source by Dr. Bob talks about e-Zines. However, e-Zines are an outgrowth of the print material that my object belongs to, and I see a clear correlation with the arguments that Dr. Bob is making about e-Zines. So those are some of the things you should keep in mind with potential issues or challenges. Which brings us to the library. I'm going to jump over and we are going to take a look at how some of these search terms go. Before I do that, I'm going to grab my research and search questions, and here we go. This is the Western Library's homepage. So you can see it's lib.uwo.ca. However, if you just search UWO Library, this website will come up. And we are just jumping into the search terms here. And let's start at the top of my list. So I'm going to try the history of LGBT design making. History of, oh, and you can see my practice route of this. So let's start with history of design making. It's going to think for a minute, and here we go. So we're going to start to see some of the wide range of sources, and I'm going to flag some important things that are going to come up. So first of all, you're going to see the type of source. The title is going to be here. That's the most obvious method of seeing what the article is about. Your search terms are going to be underlined, so you can see it's pulled history and design making. I can see that this is an article versus this is a book. And I'm just going to do a quick skim to see what kind of sources this search term has pulled up. So a few things that I'm going to notice is that there's some kind of more general approaches. I can see this is about teaching with Zines, but there's also some very specific, much more niche articles. So this is about a very particular protest group, or in the San Francisco Bay Area, versus this Copy Machine Manifesto, Artists Who Make Zines, is collaborative and is covered by a much wider range of artists and participants. So what I'm seeing here is that there's a lot of information about the history of Zine making, but I can probably narrow a little bit by adding LGBT, and this is interesting. Now we're seeing how this overlap gets much more narrow. Interestingly, we can see that this Zine Pedagogies article is coming up a second time. And we can see that, yes, there are sources available. So you would just go through and find the kind of articles that fit best with you. So I'm seeing that there's a history of Zine making in the LGBT community. And because of that, I may be interested in this like very niche Zine that I have. So then I might try small run Zine. And looking here, there's some really interesting things coming up. So I think this is a great progression. I've seen that there's a history of LGBT Zine making that I can support with sources. And now I'm looking into the much more specific circumstance that I have, which is a very small run Zine. I'm immediately interested in this article because I'm seeing, ooh, this is addressing the difference between how big companies make these products and how smaller artists do. But now I'm looking at the publisher information, and this is not an academic source. This is a popular magazine that has been archived and is searchable in the database. So you need to continue to make those critical judgments here. Versus when we get down here, this is about the ethics of using Zines in universities. And this looks like it's after a conference maybe, but we can also see that it's peer reviewed It's a good academic source. But as I continue to scroll, I find this. This is one of the things that aligns with many of my research questions. It's kind of an ideal source: signs, half-lives, and afterlives on the temporalities of social and political change. So if we jump back over here, we can see that this is addressing some of my questions about the relationship between science and political activism. It's got some history elements, and seems like would be a very good source. So I would save this and continue to work through my sources. There's another one, Science's Community Archive, things like that. So this is an example of how I might move through my research terms. Like we saw, I didn't go in order of my questions. I saw what kind of sources came up with this history of LGBT design making. And then based on the results I got here, I was able to find that maybe smaller on Zines was a good next step, tried that out, and that helped me get sources also about the Zines and political speech or community organizing. So make a plan for your research, but also kind of follow where things go. And then, yeah, save the article, make sure you hold on to all the citation information, and continue to experiment. So that is what search looks like. I'm going to jump back into my slideshow here to wrap us up quickly. So this was a very brief example. Research will take you a lot longer than that, especially when you're starting out. So please remember to experiment, but I will finish up with some final tips. So number one, start early. Good research takes time and you will run into problems. Assume there will be at least one major crisis in the middle of your research. It's probably going to be helpful for your own time management, and know that you can work through those things, especially if you've buffered in enough time to reach out to professors and TAs. Experiment with your search terms. You also need to think critically about your approach, where you're searching, what you're searching, and the sources that you turn up. Make sure that they are good academic sources, and make sure you keep track of your sources and cite appropriately. You can have the best academic sources in the world, but if you are not citing properly, you will still be losing significant marks and potentially get in serious trouble for plagiarism. So make sure you're citing properly. And finally, ask for help. You can talk to a librarian. Librarians are research wizards. The librarians at Western are incredibly friendly. You can book appointments with them online. You can talk to someone at the front desk in Weldon. Librarians are wonderful. I encourage you to talk to them. And you can also email me. My website is, or my email is on screen here. And I'm always happy to answer any of your questions. That is all that I have for today. Again, reach out if you have any questions. And I hope you have good luck with your research.